nourishing the mind, body, and soul for the Asian diaspora. Have you eaten?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Have You Eaten, where we reclaim our narratives one conversations at a time. And as you know, I like to bring people on that I find really interesting, that I think that you would also find interesting too. And today I'm so excited to have Dave Liu with me. Dave accomplished so many things. So he's the managing director and co-founder of Hyphen Capital. He also is a tech founder and president of Expo. And he's also co-founder of Stand with Asian Americans. So, the guy is not busy at all. So welcome, Dave.
Thanks, G. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And the way that we typically start too is we ask, how do you identify?
Yeah, he, him, Taiwanese American, investor, founder, dad, all the things.
Amazing. And Dave and I actually met not that long ago in person, even though I've known Dave. I may have stalked you a little bit just because you're just so interesting. But we met not that long ago, and he was just such a delight to meet in person. And so I'm really happy that you're here to have this conversation. The first thing that pops into my mind is, I think about like the traditional kind of immigrant Asian family and the doctor, lawyer, finance, whatever. The thing is, like, your background is so it's not on the usual kind of path of that, right? Like you I guess like finance, but at the same time, no. And you also do a lot within the community from an activism perspective. So there's so many parts of you. And then I got to experience you as a dad a little bit when you were glowing about your son. And I just thought that was so beautiful. But so just to start, like, how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I wouldn't have thought that. I feel like I've led a pretty predictable and safe career that my parents would have wanted. But I think I probably went off the rails when I started my first company, and that made them a little more worried. But no, I mean, I was the typical Taiwanese American kid growing up in New Jersey. Went to Ivy League school, worked in consulting, then did tech jobs at big companies. So I jumped through hoop after hoop, like so many Asian Americans. To one, I mean, because we were raised to think that was a safe way to do things, and also two, because that I knew that that's what my parents would have wanted, and it was almost like we were raised to live out their dreams, to make sure that we are secure and that we were financially secure and stable. So worked at companies like eBay and Apple and Yahoo and all these Sony and other places, and eventually joined a startup that got bought by Cisco. But the taste of that first startup was really exciting to me because I'd only worked at pretty big companies before then. That being said, I did work at Yahoo when it was 1,000 people. It was a startup, and but it was not a tiny startup. But seeing Jerry Yang at the helm, sitting around the corner from me, leading the company, I mean, that was inspiring to me to see that there was an Asian American who could actually do that and build a company that was that well known at the time. This is the late 90s, and Yahoo was one of the biggest internet companies in the world. And so that was inspiring for me to see that. So I think it's after I joined a startup, I realized, oh, this smaller company thing is more for me. I don't like the big company thing. After going to Stanford for business school, I think there was something in me that made me want to do more, something bigger. And I got that bug. And so, I joined a startup, got bought, and then I decided to start my own first company after that. And that's when I think I realized, like, oh, I really enjoy kind of doing my own thing. And so built that company, and then I built a second company, raised venture capital for that. And then I think that first taste of doing my own thing was the first time I went off the rails, like off the parental rails of, what I should do. Because my dad was an engineer. My mom, oddly enough, my mom started her own company in freight forwarding, and because she had worked for someone for 25 years or like some crazy amount of time, and then she decided, I want to do this myself because, why am I making money for someone else? I can do it myself. So my dad supported her in that, and she built a little business like right off of Wall Street by the Twin Towers. She had an office. It was all hers. And so seeing her do that too is like, oh, it made me believe that, it's okay to do this. But once her kid did it, it was not as, she wasn't as happy. So I think even after I started my first company and, we were throwing off millions of dollars, she was still waiting for me to quit and join Google. And it's like, all right, when are you going to be done with this? But I think that's just a mentality that, she had. And my dad had passed away already when I was 25. So he didn't get to see me start my own company. But I think he would have been like, he was all for it. When I was little, I told him I wanted to go into business, and he said, because he told me not to be an engineer, because he said you'll always be working for someone else. He said, yeah, business is good because then you'll be the boss. So he always, I think he always hated working for the man, or feeling like he was always told what to do by people that were less competent than him. But I think that's why he would have been glad that I did my own thing. And then I think after that, I realized I had been building a community for Asian founders in the Bay and Silicon Valley. And that's when I started building a syndicate to help out some of these founders during the pandemic. And that's when I started investing and, getting other people to invest as well. And that kind of led me down the path to Hyphen Capital today. And along the way, all the things that happened, just writing more and thinking more about the community and how to lift everyone up. It just made that kind of mission and vision more clear to me, that's what I want to do for the rest of my career.
That's awesome. So how did you grow up? Like when you were growing up as a kid, like did your parents, were they lovey-dovey? Like were they telling you they loved you, or were they asking you, have you eaten?
Oh yeah, no, it was very much a have you eaten. I never got it. I love you. I don't think I got any hugs from them until I hugged them and forced them to hug me. I'm like, I'd always make them really awkward because I'd hug when I was older after graduate college. I'd like hug them and they'd be like, totally uncomfortable. But I just wanted to get them acclimated to me hugging them or kissing them, and because I never got that. And I saw, when I go to my like non-Asian friends' houses, I'm like, hey, how come they get all this like affection from their parents, and we were not used to it. So I think my sister and I eventually broke them in, but yeah, I think it was very much you had a role to play and you were supposed to obey and do it, and if you didn't, there would be consequences. I think it was very much it wasn't like a non-loving household, because the way they showed their love was, how have you eaten, and then the how would I say, corporal punishment was because I did not do well. So I got my act together, like, and it worked until I was too big, and I was like, no, this is not going to work anymore. So, but I mean, I think I was probably not. I was a pretty troublemaking kid when I was little.
What? I cannot see that.
Oh no! I mean, I feel like I set my neighbor's curtains on fire when I was little, and that was like my best friend's like family's house. I don't know what I was doing, but I remember that, and I got in trouble for that. But I got into all sorts of shenanigans. But I liken it to the fact that I was creative and a very rambunctious kid. So, I wouldn't be starting things and doing things now and causing trouble now if I didn't do it back then.
Yeah.
Now it's good trouble, but back then it was probably not so good trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I can see too that you as a dad, you're very different from when you were growing up.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The hugging and kissing, probably too much hugging and kissing for my boys, but they're getting it all the time. So, I mean, I know at some point they're not going to want it anymore. And actually my 8-year-old, even when I say bye to him, when I drop him off and I give him a hug and kiss, he's like, like he's wife's face pushed me away. So I'm getting it already, but the 5-year-old still is, or 4 or 5-year-old is still loving it. So
yeah,
we'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah, you have to like hold on to that while they give it to you, and then they'll come back around. They'll come back around though, right? They go through their preteens and their teens, and then they come back around. So
that's a long time, but yeah. I hope so. A long time. Wow.
Oh my gosh. And then tell us about this tech company that you started. I did not even know about that until I started looking into you a little bit more.
Yeah.
But it's really fascinating. It's AI and it's working with restaurateurs.
Yeah. So we started the company as a restaurant labor marketplace, which we had, we would almost be like an Uber for cooks. If a restaurant was short staffed and a dishwasher or a cook called out sick, we had a whole roster we could blast offers to, and they could fill in the shift. But the pandemic flipped that all around when supply was constrained before it. Suddenly nobody needed workers anymore, and it was the opposite. So we pivoted to basically looking at all the AI a restaurant chain has, and then pulling together all the data from their payroll software to their scheduling software to their POS system, and then layering AI on top of that to tell a restaurant operator what they like a general manager what they need to work on and what they can fix. Like, oh, you have scheduling too many hours at 11 a.m. or you're spending too much money on fries or ketchup, or you're someone is stealing for you like this employee is stealing from you, like, or on delivery shifts this person needs to be retrained because everything's late. But those kinds of things that they don't have time to look at all the details about,
Right.
we use AI to tell them what to do.
God, that's fascinating.
Yeah,
Like
it's
that is
super
so
fun, especially
interesting.
now. Yeah, and I love restaurants. I mean, I think I've I deliver fast food. I mean, I delivered Chinese food when I was in high school, and I've
Hmm.
always I don't know, I've always been into food, and so to be able to help these restaurants kind of manage their, especially now with margins are pretty thin, with
Yeah.
costs rising and labor and ingredients, it's like every penny counts, and so being able to help people is really cool.
Yeah. I mean, so as you're talking about all the stuff that you're doing, and especially too, like your work with Stand with Asian
Hmm.
Americans, which is not easy, right? I mean, you're probably hearing a lot of stories out there,
Yeah.
and like, how do you take care of yourself? How
Mm.
do you take care of your mental health? Because growing up, also as an immigrant kid, and it sounds like um, our childhood was very similar with the corporal punishment and all,
Hmm.
and we weren't taught to self care. We weren't
Yeah.
taught about mental health and to
Yeah.
speak up for ourselves, right? We're just
Yeah.
told to do what we're told to do,
Hmm.
um, and be successful, right? So I'm
Yeah.
just curious, like, how do you take care of yourself? Like, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I am a strong proponent of getting therapy and talking out your emotions and feelings, and getting it all out there. Um, for years, I was part of YPO, and I had forums. So it was a group setting where you had other people, and you just vulnerably share all of your deepest things, but also your peers were going through similar things. So and you can kind of together in a community talk through those issues.
What's
Um,
YPO?
oh, it's Young Presidents Organization. It's kind of like
Oh,
a,
okay.
yeah, all these CEOs and other people get together. But it's a small group, about 10 people that get together every month. Um, but I mean, I think for me, it's a lot of it is now I find writing has been very good for me because it helps me process a lot. It helps me kind of think through a lot of the things that I've kind of, a lot of baggage that are in my head, that I have in my head, and that I grew up with. And I think that writing for other people is kind of cathartic too, because when they read it, they they return that gift back with
Mm.
feedback, and how they received it. And so I don't know. I think while I do feel like I need to probably spend more time finding a therapist. I just been so busy, but I think this process of kind of introspection and writing about things that I've dealt with all these years has been really helpful for me, because then it's like at least I'm processing it.
Hmm.
So I don't advise against for self therapy, because it's, I don't know, that doesn't make sense. But in a way that has helped a lot. And then you find your tribe of people, and you find people who get you, and you talk things through. I'm pretty much an open book about a lot of things, so I've always been very vulnerable about these things. But um, I think it's harder if you're someone who's kind of introverted and don't like sharing those things, because then
Mm.
you kind of suppress it, and there's a lot of stuff's bottled up. But um, I'm not one to bottle stuff up. If I'm angry, you're gonna hear it. If I am, upset, you're gonna, experience it. But I don't think it's healthy to bottle things up.
It still like makes me uh, what's the word I'm looking for? So I have my own kind of not biases, but ideas about Asian men,
Hmm.
right? So I grew up in a single family household with my dad, and he was like a former lieutenant colonel of the Korean
Mm.
Army. Like,
Hmm.
I mean, he checked my bed to make sure it was like fully done right, and the white glove test on my furniture. I
Oh
mean,
wow.
it was
Hardcore.
It was hardcore. And so, and he definitely did not say, I love you. How are you? How's your mental health today? Like, there was nothing like that, right? It was just like, and so I grew up thinking like, oh, all Asian guys must be like this. And, you know, because my uncles are like that too. And so a lot of my relatives and so when you talk about, oh, you know, therapy and you talk about being vulnerable and talking about things, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. I mean, it's different generation. And I think, and again, it's not, I don't think all men of any race are, you know, fall into one category or another. Like there are some that just aren't that way. I like just even seeing, you know, the Democratic vice president nominee, like Tim Walz, like he's a football coach, but he's also an advisor to the gay straight, you know, like community at his high school. And I think it's like being, and you see he's a girl dad and he loves his daughter and how he's proud of her and he's very vocal about it. I think there's a different view of masculinity that's come about in our generation. You know, there's still plenty of that toxic masculinity out there, but then there's another side that I think people are hopefully finding and more aware of, that you don't have to be that way. I think that the whole insecure alpha male trying to front for, I don't know, for other people. I mean, I don't need that. I think any real man doesn't have to do that because they're secure enough in their own masculinity. They don't need to front and play a role. Like you see these Andrew Tates and other weird incel dudes out there who I'm like, you realize that that's not attractive to anyone. You're alone for the reason because you're probably a dick. So it's like, you know, you don't have to be that way. But I think if you are someone who's introspective, empathetic, think about other people, you usually end up in a place where you should become a feminist because you're like, hey, these are things I would want for myself. Why would I want this for someone else to be able to do these things? Like just because, you know, I have different, you know, different chromosomes that like I should have it any better than someone else. It doesn't make sense to me. So I think that's the way I want to raise my boys too, because it's like, you know, I think I didn't have daughters, but I would have really wanted a daughter, because one or two, one because boys are crazy and they're just try to kill themselves all the time. But I know raising a girl is probably very, very hard too. But I feel like for me, it's like I would have loved to have the opportunity to raise her like I would have raised any other like boy or anyone else, because I wanted them to pursue whatever they wanted to be or whatever they wanted to do. I think that's the most anyone can ask for, is that their kid grows up to be able to be passionate about and good at something they love doing. You know, whatever gender it is. So, I mean, I think that there is a difference between our, you know, how our parents were raised, especially when in societies where boys were favored. You know, I mean, and girls were, you know, thrown in the river or something. I mean, that kind of is a long ways back, but that patriarchal society continues, you know, throughout generations, and it's sometimes hard to get rid of that. But I'm hoping that we'll have more role models that are not like that. And hopefully that changes what Asian men specifically are like, you know, for generations to come.
Yeah. I have a son who's going to be 17 in November. And a couple years ago, he actually, you know, climbed into bed with me and he's like, I really want to take this online class. And I said, oh, really? Okay, let's check it out. And it was an Andrew Tate class. Oh, he was it was kind of like a pyramid scheme. Like kids at school were signing up for it. And then if you get your friend to sign up for it, you get $5, like that sort of thing.
Gosh.
And so we sat there in bed together and I'm like, well, let's talk about this a little bit. And, you know, my son is very empathetic. He is such a compassionate little boy. Well, he's not really little anymore. He's way taller
17.
than me. Yeah, he's like almost 6 foot tall. But he's just this incredibly kind boy. And so when he brought that up, I was like, oh, what did I do wrong?
Oh man.
But what occurred to me was no one did anything wrong, or he wasn't, you know, his intentions were, I think, a certain thing. It wasn't necessarily to follow in Andrew Tate's footsteps, but I pride myself in the fact that like I could have these open conversations with him that my parents couldn't have with me. And hopefully that kind of helps direct him.
Yeah.
And so when you and I are growing up, we didn't have that, right? Like if I went, yeah. And so
you don't talk to your parents.
No, not at all. And so, I know for me, there was a moment, this pinnacle moment in time where I had to make a decision of, am I going to continue this trauma? Am I going to continue this way? Or am I going to stop it right here and get help and get therapy and do all that stuff? I'm curious, did you have that moment? Did you have a moment where you were like, all right, I got to do things differently? And if so, what was that?
I mean, I don't know that as a parent I've ever thought that, because I knew going into it how I would be. But I think that's because for me, I had already changed as a person prior to that, just thinking about, and then I don't know, it's like, I feel like at a younger age, I'd already been very aware of my feelings. And because I was like a peer counselor and other things, I found early on in my life, I was like in eighth grade, I was a peer counselor. And then I had also been in different groups, like, along the way. And then in college, I started going to church and then that kind of thing. So I feel like I've been around that kind of environment of thinking about others already. But it wasn't something that, I was never, I don't know. There was never a switch that turned on for me. It was just more like, that's how you should be. Because like, that's how I would want to be. So I felt like, I'm like, oh, I should always try to, think about, and that's a very Asian perspective too, of thinking about others before you think about yourself. Cause it's like, oh, like the have you eaten? But I think in a very real way, if you think about people as humans, not just, like, oh, I need to do this for them because that's my obligation. In a Confucius way, I need to respect them and care for them as a guest. But many of those people do it in a resentful way. It's like, oh, this sucks. I got to do this. But but for me, it's like, oh, if you think about others, then like they should. I mean, ideally they'd be thinking about you too. But that's how a civil society should work. But it doesn't always work. But I guess that was always kind of the way I was. I never felt like I was one way, and then all of a sudden there's like a switch or anything like that.
But what made you become a peer counselor in 8th grade? I mean, that means you were 13. That's a young age to like start, being compassionate and showing empathy like that.
I don't know. It went from burning down houses and curtains to that. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
No. Yeah, right? I don't know. I mean, maybe it was because my friend group was very much like that we always, and I was very lucky because when I grew up, I grew up when I was up in the 4th grade, and I was the only Asian kid in it was all black and white school. And then we moved to Princeton, New Jersey, and it was much more diverse. And there were about 30% Asians. So I had a lot of friends who were also in the same peer counseling group. We all did it together. But also I think it was because a lot of us came from immigrant cultures that were less about ourselves and feeling entitled than it was about kind of thinking about hearing what others were going through too. But yeah, I feel like I was very lucky to grow up where I did and with the people I did, because I think they shaped who I was. And obviously having a lot of female friends helped too, because it's like kind of, if we're being dumb boys, they'll call us out on it. And so and my friends were very frank about that, and I'm still friends with them today. But it's like, I think that having healthy relationships with women in your life, throughout is very important. And my wife and I worry about it, like, oh, our oldest only hangs out with boys now. All of a sudden, and then these boys will be boys, and that's how they do it when they're young. But our 4 and 5-year-old, he's turning 5 next month, but most of his friends are all girls because there aren't any boys in the class right now. But we're wondering, when there are boys, will it change? Will it be different? But right now he still has his angry moments, but you can tell he's a lot more gentle and sweet because of that. But when they're boys, just super aggro, testosterone, whatever. I mean, they don't have it yet, but they're different.
Rambunctious.
Rambunctious, yeah. So, but yeah, I feel like I've always been kind of this way. I've never been that, like, I don't like the term alpha because it feels like you have to be some aggressive jerk to be that. And I've never felt like that. I mean, I played sports and I did other stuff and it was fine. Hell, I've gotten in fights and gotten, in a bar fight or kicked. I was suspended from school for like getting in a fight with someone. I'm like, I have no problem with that, but I never felt like I had to be like super masculine or anything like that. It was not I just never crossed my mind. I had to act that way. Because it's just weird to me that you'd have to act that way, and now I'm like, oh, a real man doesn't have to act. Like, it's like, I mean, I think it's kind of this weird sense that all these people who feel emasculated and whatnot are all of a sudden having to, like, this whole alpha thing is, it's very weird to me because I'm like, well, a real alpha doesn't call himself an alpha. That's just silly, That's totally,
Right.
it seems, I don't know what beta means, but it seems very beta to me that you have to even say that. If you
Right.
can't be recognized an alpha, you're probably not the alpha.
Right.
So,
Right. If you have to tell somebody something that you are, then you're
that's
probably
probably
not
not it.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a whole security thing. And I've always been very, I mean, not always been very secure. Who am I kidding? In my later, maybe in my 30s and later, I became a lot more secure. And that's when I realized, like, oh, I don't have to be someone for someone else, or, like, I'm perfectly happy with who I am.
Yeah. I mean, do you find that, being head of, Hyphen Capital and being president of a tech company and, co-founder of SWAA and like doing all the work that you're doing in the community, do you ever feel at times, like, I know you said you don't feel like you need to be alpha or super masculine, but I picture in some of the industries that you're in, you have to be, or is that like a totally like false thing that's in my head?
I think that's what people assume because we are in a patriarchal society that is like, oh, everyone, I have to be a 6'2" white male to be good at anything and like have command any authority. But that's not the case. I mean, there are plenty of very like strong and confident and like, perfectly able women that are running big things too.
Hell
And
yeah.
they're not alpha they're alpha. They're not, don't be alpha male or super like, testosterone or whatever. I mean, I think it's just, that's what people have been raised to believe is what it looks like to run things. But that's the same reason why people don't think Asians can run things, because we're too quiet or passive or this or that. So until we get that kind of the stereotype out of our mind, we're always going to think, oh, it's supposed to be a 6'2" white guy who's, the joke, the 6'2" white guy, blue eyes, whatever. Like, there's a reason why that's a meme. It's like, people want to date that because that's what we've been programmed to think is successful. But I'm like, why? So why can't it be, Puerto Rican woman, like, who's 5'4"? Like, they should do it too. But I mean, I think that's why, these norms, these stereotypes, all these things are really dangerous because it puts everyone in a box, right? So for me, it's like, hey, if you're self-aware and confident and you like are good at what you do, doesn't matter what you look like. People respect you because they know that you have that confidence, but you also know what you're talking about. All too often, so many people that made it had had to fake it the whole way, and they've gotten away with it because they look the part. But I mean, too many people have done that, and you're like, gosh, this person is so mediocre. Like, how they even get here? But they've failed forward for so long. I mean, right? I mean, so it's some people just get to where they are and they just keep failing forward, and it's like, great, good for them. But not all of us have that luxury.
Yeah. That's why I love having these types of conversations and with people like you, where it challenges it challenges beliefs and it does challenge stereotypes. And I didn't, before I went into this work, I didn't realize how much of that was like burned into my own head. Right. And I'm having these conversations with Asian men, and it's actually very healing for me personally too, because now I get to see this other side of Asian men that I didn't grow up seeing. So our first episode was with Lo Hai, this musician, and he's a mental health advocate as well as a musician. And then talking to you and having these types of insights is, I don't even know what the word for it is, but it definitely is very helpful to me personally. And I hope it's helpful to people who are listening. Because you're right. We have to shatter these stereotypes. And a lot of the stereotypes live within us.
Yeah. And I mean, we propagate them because this is what we grew up with and this is what we assumed. Until someone shows you otherwise, there's a reason for some of these stereotypes and there's a reason why people believe this. And it's unfortunate, but, until you hear from people and meet people, and that's why it's all about meeting people. Like we all have stereotypes of all sorts of people, but until you actually meet them, you're projecting a lot of what you've learned on TV, the media, your parents, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, my hope is that as we talk to more people and we open our minds and hearts, it's like you're surprised what people can be to you. I mean, I honestly say in this election cycle, and it's like, I get so angry at the other side, and that's what this rage bait and all this stuff makes us do. But on the other end of that, it's like, oh, I assume those people hate me because I'm Asian or this or that, but or whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, like I don't know that they hate me. I just assume they do because that's what I've been made to believe, right? That's why we're, people talk about civil war because we all hate each other. We can't get along anymore. It's not, this country's too broken. I'm like, man, if that's what they keep telling us, that's what everyone believe. But maybe it's just a bunch of bots that are making me hate these people and think that they're the traitors and enemies of the state and things like that. Because I know on the flip side, they think the same thing about me and us too. Because oh, you're trying to destroy our country. I'm like, oh no, you're trying to destroy. And they're like, oh, you guys are idiots because you fall for this stuff. I'm like, oh, that's what you guys are. But they all think the exact same thing. I go over there on the other side and I read their stuff. I'm like, really? They think this of us? Because I'm like, this is exactly what I think of them. So it's like, it's just a lot of it is perceptions and what we're fed to believe about what the other believes. But whenever you think there's an other, that's the dangerous part. Right.
Yeah.
So
that's actually very, very wise and true. This idea of others that aren't like you, right? And it's like, that is, yeah, you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah. And I've come around to it because I'm like, I was always saying, oh man, these boards, they're all white males and they never have any minorities on there. Or they have a woman on there. They might have one, a black man on there, one Asian on there. But, why don't they let more people on there? I was like, oh, these guys must be totally, they're just racist. They don't like minorities on here. And then I thought more, I was like, is it that, or is it because we don't go to the same schools as their kids and we don't go on we don't volunteer on the same boards as them. We're not in the same golf clubs or whatever with them. So if they don't know, they don't live in the same neighborhoods, and if they don't know anyone of color, I mean, are they intentionally trying to keep people out, or is it more, I would if I knew somebody, but I just don't know anyone. So I just invite my friends or I ask my friends, hey, sometimes it's the same for us too. It's like, if you don't know them, how are you going to even consider them for anything? And so I'm trying to be better about giving people benefit of the doubt. I would say I'm pretty quick to judge usually, which is not great. That's one weakness I have. But, the more I can believe that there's benefit of the doubt to be given, I think that I can change my mind about people too.
But when does that benefit of the doubt, when does that get removed, right?
Backfire? If enough people show me who they are, then it's like, hey, I gave it a shot. Now I got to guard myself, and you are who you are, and there's nothing you can do about that. But and I mean, I think it's optimistic of me to be able to give the benefit of the doubt, and I'm not always doing it, but because at some point you just have to survive, and you can't always be used up like that or hurt like that. But yeah, I think I'm trying to teach myself to at least consider the benefit of the doubt, even for a little bit. But oftentimes before, I'm like, I wouldn't even consider it. I'm like, nope, that person's this, that person's that. It's like, but that's the dangerous part is if everyone lives that way, we're never going to have, kind of nothing's going to be repaired, right? So
yeah, that's true. That's very true. Just switching gears a little bit, tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing with Sound with Asian Americans.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's a pretty, powerful group of people who've come together in community
Yeah.
And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So it all started during the pandemic when, after all the hate crimes were happening here in San Francisco, where I live, and in New York, and we're watching the news. When the shootings in Atlanta happened, we wrote a letter that we put in the Wall Street Journal that condemned Asian hate crimes. We had about 8,000 leaders sign it. President Bush signed it. Andre Iguodala signed it. J.J. Abrams, the director, signed it. And all these CEOs of Google and DocuSign and DoorDash. And that's what led to this movement. I think that symbol that we had in the Wall Street Journal, the full page ad with the letters enough in big, bold letters, and just saying, hey, we write your code, we do your nails, we cook your food, and this is how you treat us. We're always treated like foreigners in our own country. That was a symbol for a lot of people to say they could speak up. Before, I don't think it was, a lot of Asians didn't think they were allowed to speak up because it was like, oh, what do we have to complain about? We have it pretty good here. And it's like, no, I mean, if people are treating you this way, that's wrong. Call it out as such. But that group and that movement kind of really gave people kind of ground to stand on for themselves, to stand up for themselves and say, hey, this isn't right. Like, I don't deserve this, and to speak up for themselves. And I think for a lot of people, that's the first time they saw anything like that ever happen, because most of the Asians usually don't publicly make statements like that. But it was a big full page ad in the paper, in the Wall Street Journal of all papers, which is very conservative, wealthy, capitalist, paper. But a lot of these people who were reading it were like, this person lives in my neighborhood. This person's on my board. This person's on this. Like, they saw their peers, but they didn't see them that way, in that light. And so since then, we've gotten kind of, we've worked with a lot of nonprofits to help them, but also we've now kind of pivoted after seeing so many cases that people came to us with about discrimination in their workplace, and not having a voice or not having any legal recourse and not knowing even know what to do in that situation. We've built a legal defense fund, and now the board is the executive director is a Korean American woman who's a lawyer who actually won a settlement against her employer for discrimination, for being Asian, and then another victim of this Asian discrimination to us also is also on the board, another woman. And so for me, I'm proud of where it's become, because we talked about how we want to fight against discrimination in our lives. And a lot of people who messaged me were people who in their workplace said that they were stuck in their jobs and they weren't being promoted because of their race, and all the kind of stereotypes around it. And so it's like, okay, well, if we really make a difference, like the legal defense fund will actually help us fight. And so no one will bully us anymore. I think that, to me, is like I'm really proud of that evolution of what it's become, because that doesn't exist for us. And so I feel like it didn't exist because we didn't think we deserved to actually fight back. And now, we're realizing, oh, why shouldn't we fight?
Yeah. And then it goes back to speaking up and going against the stereotypes, right? I actually found the organization because I went through my own thing for being Asian and being woman. And so I am so supportive of that organization that you've built, and the work that you guys are doing there. Because when I went through my thing, you didn't exist. And I just remember how alone I felt. So alone. And
you don't know what to do. You don't even know what the next thing to do. So that's why we have an ability to actually reach out and someone can talk to you about assessing your situation, because it's very scary when you feel alone and you feel like there's no recourse you have. So you just go move on.
Yeah.
But then they don't learn the lesson. They do it the next person.
Yep, exactly. And I was very fortunate that I actually ran into a law firm that had a Korean American attorney, woman, who talked me out of a couple things and talked sense into me. And because I was scared, I was, feeling alone. I was scared. I felt like a failure. I felt all these emotions, and it really took a village to support me. And so when I found SWAA, I was like, wow, this is so necessary. So thank you so much for all that work that you do there.
No, I appreciate it. And I'm glad we have a place for a lot of people in the future that they don't feel alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's time for us to kind of wrap things up a little bit, but I've enjoyed getting to know you so much. And like I said, like doing this work and talking to people like you and learning more about, just differences and the similarities that come up. Because I think you and I are the same generation. So we're the same generation. We grew up very similarly, but we're very different at the same time. And that's like the beautiful thing, we're not the same. But we do have a lot of similarities. And so I just wanted to thank you so much for being here, having this conversation and giving us a little peek behind the doors to Dave Liu.
Thank you, Chi. Thanks for having me. That was fun.
Yeah. Well, before we end, I would love to hear any kind of advice you would give to someone, a young person or any person who's struggling with their identity or struggling, finding their path. Like, what would you tell them?
I mean, honestly, I think there's so much we grow up with our parents, the weight of our parents and the burden of our parents' dreams for us. And a lot of times we conflate that with our own. And I think, it takes being self-aware and honest with yourself with what you actually want to do. Because sometimes you actually believe what they want for you is what you want. And it's hard to separate that. But then you realize later in life, and not when it's too late, but many years later, that it isn't what you wanted for yourself after all. And I hope, I think it takes some soul searching and, hard conversations to figure out what do you really want to do with your life? Because, if you're young, you have many years ahead of you to figure it out. But if you don't feel like you deserve to live your life and do what you want to do, then you'll never kind of be fair to yourself, and you'll be unhappy. You can tell yourself you're happy because you're secure and you have a good, a good salary, you have a good house and everything else. But there's a sense of fulfillment that I've seen many people at a certain age have. They don't have it, and I don't know if they're going to find it because they just don't know they never figured out what they wanted. And so my hope is that when you're younger, that you figure out what you want and what really drives your joy and fills you up. Because if your cup is always empty, it gets hard to get through day after day. And mental health wise, like that can be draining. Like I think you want to find that, because that joy, that fills your cup is what keeps you, I think, in a good place. And so if you don't find that, I hope that you do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. And for those of you listening, if no one's told you today, you deserve to be happy. You deserve to live a fulfilled life. And I hope you tune back in to more conversations where I bring interesting people from the Asian diaspora to have these conversations. And if you have anyone that you want to nominate to be in this conversation with me, I would love to hear from you. It's hey@hellohappy.com. And this is G saying thank you for joining us today. And thank you, Dave, so much again. And until next time, I hope your stomach and your heart stay full. Thank you.
Hello, Happy Fam. Thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell. And until next time, I hope your bellies and your hearts stay full.